Welcome to the Anti-Architect Podcast. I am your host, Christian Giordano. As president and owner of the design firm Mancini Duffy, I am driven by a quest for learning and radically changing the industry. With this podcast, I'm hoping to improve the industry that I'm so passionate about by taking a critical look at how architects work through a variety of voices and shared experiences. Hello, Anti-Architect Podcast listeners. I'm excited to have Peter and Tom Gluck as my guests here via Zoom on the Anti-Architect Podcast. Peter is the founder of Gluck Plus, a renowned architect-led design build studio in New York City. Tom is Peter's eldest son, and he is a partner at the firm. Gluck Plus specializes in architectural services, development, architect-led design build, and are known for their diverse work worldwide. Their projects range from houses to religious buildings, community centers, university buildings, historic restorations, and the list goes on and on. Peter holds a Bachelor of Arts from Yale University and a Master of Architecture from the Yale School of Architecture. He has designed and built a series of houses from New York to Newfoundland, winning many, many awards. In addition, he has taught at Columbia and the Yale School of Architecture, where Peter is an outspoken critic of the AIA and many other aspects of our profession, which I'm excited to talk about. Tom holds a Bachelor of Arts with a concentration in visual and environmental studies from Harvard College and a Master's of Architecture from Yale University. Tom joined the firm as an associate principal back in 2005, but before Gluck Plus, Tom worked at Herzog and de Meuron as the site project manager for the design and construction of the Walker Arts Center in Minneapolis. So thank you guys so much for your time and for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And so a few topics that I definitely want to get into, and I'll kind of just throw a little outline here. Definitely want to talk about design build. I want to talk about how architects get paid in our fee structure. Love to talk about the relationship and the father-son practice, technology, and then just the profession in general. So with that, Peter, you and I actually share a common professor. I was listening to a podcast that you had done, and you spoke about Vincent Scully. And I actually also had Vincent Scully. So towards the end of Scully's career, when I was in architecture school at the University of Miami, I guess there was some issue where he was no longer allowed to be a professor at Yale due to his age. And so Miami picked him up and he was a professor there. So I got to enjoy that.
I think he was 150 at the time.
Exactly.
And he was still teaching when I was at Yale. So
okay. Yep. So it's, so you also had him as well.
I did.
Oh, wow. That's great. I remember
the same slides, but a completely different perspective.
Yep. Same slides.
So he went from a kind of heroic modernist to a contextualist and used the same slides to prove both.
30 years apart. Or 40.
It's absolutely correct. I don't think I appreciated it back in the day, kind of the magnitude of having a Scully there. And I remember that it was one of the few classes they put in the arena in Miami, in like one of the theater arenas, that held, a couple thousand people. And everyone from around the community came and sat in, took this class. And I remember us as the architecture students kind of shoved in the corner, and we had a teaching assistant that could have cared less about being there. But yeah, pretty interesting.
Did they have lions and gladiators too?
Pretty much. So I just a question for both of you, and you can kind of pick and choose who answers it. But if you had to pick one thing, what annoys you about architects? Tom, why don't you go first?
I'd say that they think that their work really is relegated to the office and the computer. It used to be the drafting table, but now the computer.
Okay.
That's sort of fundamental to the way we practice, and I think fundamental to creating good architecture.
And Peter?
Well, to be facetious, which I usually am, it's probably the glasses they wear, which is a sign that somehow they're different, or that they're, I don't know, it's that they need a signature, that they need to be, since they think of themselves as somehow special, they need to tell the world about that.
I love it. That is a great answer. It's I always joke with some of my other friends that are not architects that I can pick an architect out, from a mile away. And a lot of it's the glasses, a lot of it's sort of the way that they carry themselves. And that's really funny. So what about, let's just talk quickly about the educational system for architects. What would you guys change sort of now looking back at the education system, or looking at how you're, as you bring in new hires into your office, what about the education system works for architects and does not work?
I think I would change the teachers. I think one of the problems is that the schools have generations of teachers who are teaching how to become teachers rather than teaching about architecture, because there needs to be more exposure from outside the academy. It's not so much the label, it's where those labels are practiced and how they're practiced. Mm-hmm. And the school gets to be a kind of special place with its own language and its own very self-conscious and protective environment, as opposed to being open and looking at the real aspects of the things they're talking about.
Yeah. So
I might
go ahead.
I might just. I think it's another way of, I think, expressing the same sentiment, which is that it's like, well, what is school really for? Theoretically, there are a couple different kinds of schools, right? Because you have a 5-year bachelor's of architecture, which is very different than, say, a master's. But if school is a place where you practice maybe developing your own sense of design, that's something I think the schools can do well. I think, and ostensibly, there is, as part of our licensing, there's 3 years of experience you have to get before you can sit for a license. But the practice of architecture is not really taught in school. And I think that although there's a structure for how to pick that up, which is through work, which I think is appropriate, I still think there's a sense that you graduate with a master's or a bachelor of architecture and somehow you are ready to practice, and you really need a lot, actually much more than even 3 years experience in the workplace to really start to try to understand all the various complexities of the profession.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the some of the work study programs, like we've had people from Waterloo University in Canada. We've had people from Kansas, which is also a work co-op program, and obviously Cincinnati as well. I think that's probably the most, prestigious one, let's call it. Those students, I think that's a very valuable lesson of integrating in the practice or the architecture practice into when you're learning. And there's that. And listen, I look back at school, and I have a graduate degree as well. And, that time was fun in a sense to kind of practice these designs and really understand and find a sensibility. But the reality of ultimately getting and going to work, and then the route that I took more on the corporate firms, is very, very different from the architecture practice.
Right. We've had a steady stream of Waterloo interns who we've had both as interns and are actually very keen to hire them back when they finally do graduate, because it is a more complete package. And Austin also, UT Austin also has a program like that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. What is your opinion, I'm curious, on corporate architecture firms? Is that selling out? Is there, what is your, what do you think of like a Gensler or even my practice, Mancini Duffy, or some of the bigger, more corporate firms, as opposed to the route that you and your father, have taken, really sort of the private practice, what I would call more design oriented in a sense?
Want to take that?
Probably you shouldn't ask me.
No, I think you should. I think it'll be more interesting coming from him.
Definitely.
I think Gensler is a perfect example of kind of packaging architecture and thinking of architecture as a kind of a PR product. They develop products, not ideas or not space, and they're incredibly good at it, and fast. And so, if you're a developer and you want a quick image that looks professional, you get it. From my opinion, it's very thin. It's pasted on the facade of buildings or interiors. It's like a giant machine. So I think probably the positive aspect is that the buildings they do are probably, and the spaces that they make are probably better than people who do the same thing without the expertise that they do. So they're good at what they do. Mm-hmm. I just don't particularly like what they do.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, I wish that the projects that they had were done by architects who were, more committed to the principles and the artistic endeavors involved in true architecture.
I think one of the questions is why is there this thing called corporate architecture? Why are there these larger firms, and what is it born out of? And I think and I'm sure and everyone who's listening who's an architect knows, some of it is in response to the kind of economic realities of the profession, where it's very hard to spend as much time as I think probably any architect would like to spend on any one project, in the fee structures that we as a profession are able to command within the greater market, and that's real, and that's a problem.
100%.
I think that I would characterize that kind of architecture as almost like set design. If you want to find talent and you want to find incredible abilities for making things, and if you look at the world of set designers in film, it's amazing, just amazing what those guys do.
Sure.
And I think that Gensler is in a way like that, but they're also able to make it not out of cardboard, but they're also able to make buildings that work, I think, to some degree. Mm-hmm. And to that end, they're good, because there's certainly a lot of architects and a lot of buildings that simply don't work.
Absolutely, and
that's no small thing.
And going back to the fee structure, that is something that I wanted to talk about. I look at, let's say I were to do a typical interiors job, and the price per square foot that I would charge is very market driven, right? It's a whatever, let's call it $4.50 a square foot for a good, nice corporate interior job. That's a price that I'd have to quote today. That's also a price that I was quoting 10 years ago, if not even 15 years ago. And so getting that structure of this is how much it's going to cost because the market will bear X amount, is then obviously very difficult to balance on the human capital and the human resource side, right? Is if I'm not getting any more money,
it's impossible.
It's impossible.
It's not hard.
I totally agree. And getting clients to, pay for the value that they're getting versus pay for the quantity that they're getting is a very, very difficult proposition, especially in a corporate firm, which kind of goes back to that Gensler model that they are very good at, right? Churning out a certain amount of quality of design for X amount of dollars and keeping, thousands.
But what are they actually turning out? They're more and more they're turning out a cartoon of something that will be built by somebody else, and all of the nuts and bolts and the difficulties that normally or used to be the role of the architect have been usurped by good contractors who understand how to make facades and they understand how to make these things. Whereas the Genslers of the world don't do that. They stop at a certain point, and they know when to stop. So what's happened, in order for them to continue earning a profit, they can't deal with the dollars per square foot they do. The only way they can manage the money is by doing less and less for that square foot price. So if you can really seriously get involved in an exterior facade system and mechanical systems and all of the kind of things that make a really good building, you would have to charge much more. The world has found it more efficient to allow the people in the build world to do that rather than the architects.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is not that the build world is smarter than architects. Quite the contrary. What is the reason? The reason is that architects don't do it. It's somehow been dirty, and not only has it been seen to be dirty to have to be on site. It's just that they haven't gone to the site. They've absented themselves from the actual production of the thing that they've designed. Yeah. So the ultimate, and we're going there quickly. The ultimate result is that architects make cartoons, and other people actually make buildings.
And I think that one of the things that I think this is something that's known about the profession, and it's not new, right? So this is something that's been happening for not years, but decades and generations of architects, and that whole cycle of, even one of the first questions you asked about architectural education. So as time goes on, as architects have to withdraw to do less in order to fit within the fee structure, and then they're capable of doing less. And it's not that those things aren't figured out. They are. Someone has to figure out how something is built. And whether that's done through a vendor and a system, a package system that you can easily specify, which architects rely a lot on, or through figuring it out kind of the old-fashioned way through, the kind of heavy coordination that a lot of the large CMs do on jobs in lieu of the architects, or they have the architects do as much as they can, and then they start over and do it themselves.
Yep.
It's happening. It's just all happening outside of our realm and out of our profession, which then only continues to put pressure on reducing our fees and us doing less. And the profession is in dire situation. And this is through kind of, a constant recirculating of this cycle.
Can I tell a little story? I have a story that I think is appropriate.
Please do.
For this. I was visiting a well-known architect in Texas, and the amount of work that he had was staggering. The projects were incredible. They were all over the country. And I went to see his office, and there were about 20 people in the office. That was it. I said, how in the heck can you do that? I don't understand. And he said, well, we found it difficult, but we found this great illustrator who we used to use, to show our clients what the buildings were going to be like. But that person has a real sense of what we do. So we're letting him actually take the proposal and do the design. And then basically the rest of it we sub out to the mechanicals and the structure. So the person designing the building is an illustrator. And that's a real story. I mean, that really, I was shocked, but I realized that at its worst, that's pretty much what's happening. Now, the problem is we don't have enough really good illustrators. That's part of the problem.
That is true. So I guess, I've heard, Peter, I've heard you say that, you feel a sense of responsibility that architects need to change the profession, right? And I feel the same way. And the way that I've gone about it is really in my firm is about the culture, making a great place to work, making sure that we use sort of our entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial spirit that we've got, where people have certain passions and we're really trying to allow them to follow that, whether that's technology or interiors, whatever it might be. And that ultimately pushes the profession for us forward, the design forward. But how do you see that responsibility in terms of changing architecture?
Well, first of all, I think it's important that you have a culture, and that you have people who want to stay, and that you have you don't have a constant turnover. I have been lecturing over the years in various places, mostly in the Midwest and outside of New York City. And I say to the young guys, well, who are you working for? And he says, well, I'm working for ABC, but 2 years ago I was working for ZYM, and I'm thinking of looking at QRY, and it's all just a big mishmash of changing heads, and this person is buying that person, like the whole thing becomes a commodity. So if your life becomes a commodity and you're making a commodity, designing one, it's not conducive to drilling down into the real nuts and bolts, not only physical but conceptual as well, of architecture. The culture is really critical, and it has to be driven, and it's expensive to maintain because you have to have lots of information within the firm. It has to be an educational, maintain itself as an educational institution, because if you keep doing the same thing again and again, where do you get?
Yeah.
And I think it's no secret that our trick, or our solution, it's one solution to the larger problem. You've articulated, how you approach it, and there are lots. And ours is really under the broad rubric of design build, but more specifically architect-led design build. And so, we have a very good, a very, very experienced group of people. We're about 40 people, but we have a lot of experienced people. People do stay, and there are people who get into architecture because from the kind of initial, how did you get into architecture kind of thing? People, there's a whole host of them, a large percentage who get into architecture because they're really fascinated and like the making of something. Yeah. And then the design is kind of the front end of that, right? The conceptualization, coming up with the theory, starting to craft space and form and material, and then all the detailing of it and the technical overlay. And these are, physical environments. These are environments that are inhabited. So it's about as complicated a making in its broadest term, whether you're a sculptor or painter, as I think it gets. And by integrating design and construction in our firm, we find that learning cycle is extended. There's much more to learn, and there's much more for everyone to sink their teeth into. It takes longer because there's so much more to it, and we practice unusually. So it's very, very rarely we get kind of people who come in with the same knowledge base that we need on a day-to-day basis, but they learn it here. And I think once they're exposed to it, they really value not just the conceptual making of something, but also its realization all the way through, the less glorious aspects of commissioning and the kinds of things that we take on as builders when we're building our work.
Yeah, and so I definitely want to talk about the design build and specifically architect-led design build. And one of the things I always say in my firm is that, I'm openly critical about us as a profession, right? We know how to draw things, but we don't know how to build things, right? And I think I learned that firsthand when I was kind of thrust into the responsibility of being a senior designer on a very large TV station, beautiful building. And I designed everything on that thing. I remember I designed, every little detail, every reveal, everything. And when it was under construction, there was a grand staircase that went up. And I remember the contractor saying to me, how am I supposed to install these, limestone panels on the side of the stair? You didn't leave any room whatsoever. And I thought, oh my God, I'm dead. Like my boss is going to be pissed. Everyone's going to kill me. I just cost like thousands and dollars. And I remember the contractor saying to me, you know what? We've actually figured it out for you. Don't worry. We're going to save you here. We're actually going to assemble this particular open area backwards, right? We're going to do it through the wall system. And then we're going to hoist these pieces of stone in backwards and kind of work from inside out, right? And
we've done that.
Yeah. And I remember that clicked for me like, oh, yeah, like I drew that and I remember drawing it thinking how cool this is going to be. There's 2.5 inches between, these two pieces of material and no problem. But no one ever said, hey, how the heck are you going to actually build that? No human can fit in there. So how did that start, design build for you guys? And I also have questions about the legality of it. How is it structured? Is it separate companies? So can you spend a little time and talk about that?
Yeah, can I want to tell another nasty little story first before we get
Sure.
into that. Because I realized how best to answer your question, which is the question, which is how do I survive as an architect? Because there's the fees are. The work is more and more complex. The fees are lower and lower. What's the implications of that? So an architect used to say he'd make a 10% fee. And of that 10% fee, this was all theoretical. This was AIA talking. Of that 10% fee, he would take 10% of that as his profit. So that was 1% was his profit. He also had to pay for his insurance out of that and all of the work. Now the contractor, it used to be called 10 and 10. It was 10% for his overhead and 10% for his profit. And the insurance, by the way, is paid for by the job. He doesn't pay the insurance. So that sounds like 10% is his profit. That's the contractor. The architect's profit, as we just remembered, if you can remember that long, about 3 minutes, I have trouble with that. That 1%. So that sounds like the contractor is making 10 times as much as the architect. And that's pretty close to being true.
Yeah.
And that's the truth.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. So how do you make money? It's a nasty question. You don't talk about that in school. Now let's start talking about design build. And let's be both the architect and the contractor. Mm-hmm. That sounds like 11%.
Yes, it does.
We sometimes say that it's our construction income supports our design habit.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
And we have we have latitude. So strictly on business terms, we could operate our architectural, and we do have two separate entities. The legal division is kind of very clean, but we have a little bit of latitude where if we feel like we're working on a project where the facade is just not quite there, or there's something that's not really worked out and we're not satisfied with its design, and yet we're past our fee for, say, that phase, if we're building it, we have latitude to extend it because we know that we have profit coming in from construction, and we don't want to just go buy boats and move to retire in Florida early, mm-hmm. right? We're dedicated to the profession. We like crafting space. We like making urban buildings and all the rest of it. So from a strict business standpoint, maybe in business school, they wouldn't tell you to do this, but as architects, it's tremendously liberating and powerful to have a little bit of latitude to let the design, everyone knows, like sometimes things fall into place really quickly and sometimes they don't. And
Sure.
Those projects really shouldn't be any worse. They're just harder sometimes. It's just the nature of the game. And to give yourself a little bit of breathing room, we have the ability to take the time that's sometimes required.
And also you have the ability to pay people to stay, whereas otherwise when someone really good gets to a certain point where he comes and says, I need more money because I have children and I'm trying to live like a human being, you can say, okay, we'll pay it, or you'll say, I'm sorry, it's time that you moved on. And moving on might often means moving out of the profession.
Yeah. So are you hiring people with a construction background, or is it purely people with an architecture background and then training them on the construction side?
So that's the key to. So let's back up a little bit about the way we practice and some of the benefits. What really drives us is the making of architecture. And that's our prime mission. That's what excites us. That's why we wake up in the morning. That's why we wake up in the morning as many days as my father has woken up in the morning, and why I do, and why younger people in our office do.
Since the dinosaurs, actually.
and so the allowing the advantage to building, and we'll get to the tricky how we do it, but the advantage to being the builder is that while we're designing, we have a lot of that knowledge base on our drafting table, right? It's from the last jobs, all the construction, trying to get those panels in, all those kinds of things, or the kinds of innovations you can do with stone when you spend time with the mason on site, or steel or glass or whatever it is. So there's a huge advantage on the front design end. And then also with our design hat on, there's a huge advantage on the back end, because we're able to make sure that the things that matter in our projects get built the way we want them to be, because we're the ones building them. The flip side of that is that as builders, we're the ones on the site running the job. So there are a million little questions that never get back to an architect, would be inappropriate to get back to an architect, but there are a million little tweaks where if you understand the basic premise and the design ideas behind them, you could do things a couple different ways, all of which would be acceptable, but one might be marginally better than the others. And with 1,000 of those little questions, again, you can just try to slowly creep it towards a better overall solution.
But on the job, are you the super? Are you the tin knocker? Are you the plumber? Right. How does all of that work?
So the way it actually works is we're the construction manager. We're doing projects primarily with GMPs, fully at risk. So we don't self-perform. We don't swing hammers.
We don't touch a tool.
There is a notion of design build, really probably grown primarily in the late 60s and 70s, where you went up and you kind of didn't do drawings and you kind of figured it out more on a residential scale, and you kind of figured it out as you went.
Yeah.
Right. That's impossible in today's buildings.
It was impossible then. It was impossible then.
But that is what I think of, by the way, because I remember that being the design and build was basically happening concurrently.
Right. And in fact, we do more drawing up front than we do when we're working. We don't only design build. So there's maybe 20% of our work where the architects only, but we do more drawing when we're building ourselves, because we know all the drawings that need to happen. And they happen by somebody, and it's much better to have them happen by the architect, kind of like what we were saying earlier.
We spend so much time checking shop drawings that we're often better off just doing the shop drawings ourselves.
Yeah.
So that means we're doing 2 sets of drawings, or 2 sets of drawings are always made on buildings, because the architect will make his so-called construction documents, and then the contractors, if they're at all sophisticated, will throw those away
and start over
and make another. So why would anybody pay for the architect to do construction documents? And that's what's happening more and more. The architects are not doing construction documents, which gets them another reason why they're getting closer and closer to being cartoon makers.
Right, and less fee. If you don't need to do that, that's the bulk of the fee.
Of course.
Yeah.
And less knowledge, and less knowledge to be able to start to turn that around.
Yeah.
So in the end, we are everything that you've done on a big project with a CM. We do everything that CM does.
Okay.
The key to our to what we think is successful about the way we practice is that we're all architects and there's continuity. So from a legal standpoint, there's a very clear line, and we have two entities, but in reality, we're the same people. So the same people who are designing, initial sketches, foam block models, all that stuff that happens that every architect's familiar with on the front end of the project, very often they're the same ones who are on site managing the job, the PM, if you will. There's some superintendent work. We're also the superintendents. And so we generally move the entire team as soon as there's ability to be on site, and it's a seamless transition. So the trajectory of a normal job is you might start with a couple people early in concept design and run through. It staffs up during CDs, and then we keep staffing up because then we're bidding and buying, which is where there's a huge amount of value, and then all the way through the management of the job. And that team then trails all the way out to commissioning.
That's the real proposition is buying the job.
Yeah.
With people who are able to have flexibility in the purchasing of the whatever the trade it is that's being bought. Whereas the contractor, when he buys, does not have the ability to change. He's got the drawings that he's stuck with. That's what he has to buy with. And they're a mess because they're done by architects.
Absolutely. So I would assume then you've got a tremendous knowledge base on the estimating side, and you're able to then understand cost really from the get-go, which I also think is a weakness on the architect side. I even said it last night to a friend at a dinner: is never trust an architect when they tell you how much something's going to cost to build. Because we don't know. I only know what it cost the last time I built it, and who knows if that was even accurate, let's be honest. So how did you get to this point where you are confident enough in your estimation and buying a job because
we don't do it the way you described it is the way we don't do it.
Okay.
We don't base our costs on anything that happened in the past. That's ridiculous. What we do is try to lean with the sequence, the way we sequence our drawings. We try to go to the market early in the job so that we can get our estimates based on market, not based on wish fulfillment or some expert.
And I think if you think about it, because that is really the key, which is, as architects, we only know what the last job cost. But that's true for contractors too. They only know if they're doing in-house estimating, they're based. Now they may have a bigger pool to draw from depending on the scale of the contractor, but they're basing it on previous work. And when you're dealing with things like steel and concrete, trying to estimate those things on cubic yardage or tonnage of steel is really, really problematic because configuration and logistics and all those things matter the most.
Sure.
So we'll design a building, we'll create, but we've even changed the normal phasing. We do SD and then we do the CD1, we call it, where we take the base building and do real drawings and actually get them out on the market. Because it's the subcontractors who actually are the ones who price things and know their pricing. And good CMs and good GCs do this too. They don't do it in-house. They do it through a relationship with a whole host of subcontractors.
Sure. So they're getting accurate pricing. Yeah.
They're getting accurate price. And it's in today's world, it changes every 6 weeks. Yeah. I mean, right now it's crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So there is no historical data anyone can rely on.
The architect will say, well, isn't that a lot of extra work? And how do you get paid for that? Yes, it's a lot of extra work. We get paid for that by.
It's pre-con. It's everyone's used to a pre-con budget.
Yeah.
They normally pay the contractor for that. Yeah. So we just take that and much more accurately than the contractor does it, because the contractor has no idea what the design is.
So then
it's also simple when you think about it. Why would you have two separate people designing and building a building? Why wouldn't you have the person that's going to take care of your building be able to both design and build it?
It does sound very simple.
Is that so hard? No, it isn't so hard. It's that we've forced it. That's the way it's been for 4,000 years. Guess what? In those 4,000 years, there've been a couple of decent buildings built.
So how are you then seeking out your clients, right? Because I'm thinking of a basically almost any of our clients, although there's probably a few, if I approach them with this concept, they would grasp onto it because they are very high design, right? They care about every little detail. But then we have a pool of clients that, it's driven, it's money driven, it's occupancy driven, it's whatever driven that it is. It's not the design portion of it. And if I were to propose a structure like this, they'd basically tell me there's no way I could do that. And I need to have X amount of contractors bid and lowest bid wins. And that's that, right? How do you guys get your clients to kind of go along with this journey? And how are you seeking out that work?
So in the beginning, it takes, part of it is building up a body of work where you've done this and building up a client base who can then be references for future clients. So, but it started, the office, this part of the office started small, started in single family residential where it's a single owner. You're not dealing with boards. You're not dealing with major banks. But over time, it's very easy to convince, with a little bit of experience, the argument is very easy to convince anybody because it is a less expensive way for the owner to get their project. When an owner comes to an architect, they don't want a roll of drawings. They want the building that they want.
Sure.
And this is a very powerful tool because we bid out to not the normal 3 subcontractors. We're bidding out to 8, 10 subcontractors in a trade. And partly because we're more aligned, our incentive and our goals are more aligned with the clients, which is that we know that if we end up wasting an extra $5 a square foot on a superstructure, if we can dial that down, it's going to go into the interior finishes, into the sculptural staircase, into the facade system or the cladding system. And those are the things that, get us excited.
There's another thing too, that we don't really talk about so much because it's not believable, but we build for probably 25 to 35% less than it would cost otherwise. It doesn't seem possible, but there's so much waste in the system. If you actually were able to understand the way things get done in design, bid, build, you'll find that there's huge amounts of waste. So we just finished a house in California, and the comparables are $1,500 to $2,000 a square foot. We were $800 a square foot.
Wow.
And it's the most slicked out building you've ever seen. And so somehow that's got to be an advantage. So we're not talking about minor things. We're talking about huge advantage.
But these advantages, which are so big and so important, and it's really important, and we're really committed to this, and we do a lot of this, is that it's applicable to every project type. So this isn't something that's relegated to the single family high end, insanely expensive $1,500 square foot building. We work for a lot, our offices in Harlem and in Manhattan. We do work for a lot of not-for-profits in Harlem specifically because we're close, but in Queens and the Bronx,
charter schools
and affordable housing. That same savings is applicable to those construction costs even more so. And from just in terms of the built environment and architecture, you're now accessing the people who can spend $1,500 a square foot, $800 a square foot. They're going to hire architects regardless.
Sure.
But the not-for-profit who thinks that architecture is something that is absolutely not available to them because it's a luxury and it's an expense, when in fact we can design a building to their budget that's appropriate for their budget, but less expensive and really well conceived, which means it's going to work better for them. It expresses their mission. It's going to be a building in the neighborhood that will inspire the community. Those are things that we're able to bring to clients who often don't have access to it. And it's all because of this model, and that's really powerful.
So We're committed to affordable housing, and we're committed to unaffordable housing.
What is the largest project you guys have designed and built?
So the biggest ones we've done entirely in-house is we've just completed in the last couple of years 2 $35 million condominium between 40 and 45 unit buildings in Manhattan.
Wow.
High-rise buildings, 13-story buildings. So, real New York City,
Sure.
all the mess of New York City construction. There is a point, there is a scale question. There's a point at which just our office of 40 can't do everything and can't work in sectors all over. But we have figured out and are now starting to apply the next mode kind of development of this model is to partner with a CM, where we can, and you have to have the right CM, you have to have a like-minded CM, and you have to have, it has to really be a mutually respected group. It can't just be a pairing for, to win an RFP or to for economic gain for one or the other. It really has to be an integrated team. And in that case, we did a building with a client who we had designed and built for 3 times. Once he was on a board of a school in East Harlem, and then on his own development project, we built Stack, which is a modular building in Inwood. And then he had a big project in Philadelphia.
The first modular building in New York, actually.
Wow.
He had a 190,000 square foot building in Philadelphia where we were the architects. And then we worked with his construction company seamlessly, bidding and buying. And then we were 1/3 of the trailer, or let me say 1/2 of the project management team throughout construction. Okay. And we were co-owners with him on that.
So how did the modular work? Did you work with a modular builder?
We worked with a modular builder. You have to identify them early because their techniques are not all the same, and the different factories do have different capacities, and you really need to tailor to them. And then it was built in. We designed it all. We worked with them. We chose to go lower tech, not high tech. This is right when Atlantic, where B2 building and the kind of catastrophe that happened there
in Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, where they went to. The goal there was to go high tech and really solve the problem. And it's clear there is an ideal form of modular construction that they were aspiring to. It's just you can't build a space shuttle in one go, right? Yeah. It takes years and years and we were a smaller building. So we said, look, we got to know the modular builders. It's very, very simple. It's offsite construction. It's the same construction techniques. It's what you're used to on site. It's just that it's all in a factory, and that has huge advantages.
Sure.
So we worked very closely with them.
Who was steel and concrete?
Who was the builder?
Steel and concrete. It was, I think now they're blocks. It was, they were, I can't remember the name.
If you want to know the real question, the real answer is that we were the builder.
That's right.
They could make all these things, but they couldn't put them together on the site,
right? Because
they weren't used to New York.
Sure.
They had their subs were these guys that would go hunting for half the season. And when they came to New York, they found that the hunting was a little bit different.
So that a couple other things I'd love to get to. I guess let's talk a little bit about technology. I learned pencil on vellum and sitting there and making real blueprints and doing that. I quickly evolved into, the 3D model guy and renderings. We at our firm have really, I'm not a big fan of just pure static renderings. I actually don't think that I learned this early on with some clients after showing them a rendering and then a year later standing in the built space and them saying, wow, I didn't think it was going to look like this, and thinking, my God, how is that possible? This looks just like the rendering. And so I somewhere along the line, I realized, well, they're not getting it with a computerized rendering. And you spend so much time sort of worrying about the plant on the desk and the fabric on whatever it might be and getting it absolutely perfect that you miss the point of being in 3D. So we've developed rendering technology in our own VR technology where I would say 90% of what we're showing a client is actually whitewashed. It's just putting a client in a space, being able to look around, manipulate, move, see things, get a feeling of space, and then we're developing it further sort of in a more traditional method, but always in in our case, Revit. What are you guys working in? Are you working in a Revit system? Are you,
So we're a little all over the place.
Okay.
We use Revit, and we find Revit actually extremely valuable because, and we alluded to this, I think, a little bit earlier, which is that, it's a big investment to build the model and maintain the model. And if you're going through a lot of design iteration to continue to keep it, and especially if the design iteration doesn't all happen ideally in the early phases. But for us, Revit's great because, it's at the end of CDs, is not the end of that model. And as we said before, very often, if it does go on, it gets kind of taken over and restarted anyway. Mm-hmm. But so the investment in that as a design tool is so useful. But for us on the back end, it's also extremely useful because we actually need the takeoffs and the quantities. We're the ones ordering the light fixtures. And so those parametric capacities are also save us a lot of time later. And that investment in the model is then stretched over, let's say design is just as an arbitrary number, a year, and construction is 2 years. We get to amortize that over the full 3-year experience.
Sure.
Also, we design a lot of models, paper models.
Yeah.
Okay.
All scales. We start with just little foam models, and we continue working with models all the way up. And I think that the 3D capability is something, me personally, everybody designs differently, but me personally, I use the 3D capability to design, not to present. And we try not to present. We try to say our office is open. We don't care when you come up here. You'll see what we're struggling with when you come. And we don't have presentations where the curtain parts and it's presentation time. And so we'd like to think we've been successful with that process if at the end of the project, the client thinks that they designed the building.
That is exactly what you're describing with our process too, because of opening the curtain, let's say, or opening the back door and showing, kind of how it's made, how the sausage is made. We try to invite clients into the process and be part of it, because there's no sense, we've always said, there's no sense in stopping a week before to create the most perfect presentation. It's just a complete waste of the client's time, of our time. And, let's get them in. Let's talk
it's not accurate.
And it's not accurate. It's fake, right? I remember telling someone we had to put the Statue of Liberty in every single view in an apartment building that we were doing because the developer wanted to see the Statue of Liberty. So no matter where you look, north, east, south, and west, there was the Statue of Liberty. It was absolutely ridiculous.
In the men's room.
That's right.
So why are architects so smart? They're such an amazing people, such an unrealized resource. Why are they so stupid? I can't understand it.
I don't know.
And, the way I started, just so you should know how sort of invested in this as I am. I started the first 3 or 4 projects I built with my own hands. I actually hammered nails, and there were a bunch of us doing this. And when it came time that plumbing had to be roughed in, we went to the lumberyard and got a book on plumbing. And then when it was time for the electric to be roughed in, we got the electric book in the same series. And we found out that none of it is so hard. It's all really dumbass simple. It's just there's a lot of it.
The one thing I think that's really important that I think as architects, is a trap, and we fall into it in our office, which is that it's not that we have so much more knowledge than, we do because we're involved, we're building, but it's not that we can have all the knowledge. We can't, and we never will be able to. Mm-hmm. What's so tremendously empowering, just like no architect would ever consider sitting down and design the mechanical system, where you have a team, you have a partnership, you have your mechanical engineers, your structural engineers, your acousticians, all the various consultants.
But we can get 90% there.
But we have what we have available to us is all the trades. So like we were working on a 250,000 square foot building, and we were trying to come up with a cost-effective, intelligent roofing system. And I you can call all the vendors, I can call all the users and get all the answers from, but that's really your resource. Or maybe there's maybe a cladding consultant or a roofing consultant, but I can just get on the phone with a roofer who's done this a million different ways and get real feedback on what the differences are.
Sure.
So, and it's having that information, having them be able to come into our office in design phase, be able to and this is a body of knowledge that's so valuable and so hard earned, because that's all they do, right? All they do is roofing and flashing. And if you have a tricky spot, like what should we do? What's the best way? What's the most cost? We want to do something unusual. We want to invent a facade expression. How would we do it? I can get the cladding guy in here, which is so much better than talking to a vendor, which is already invested in a whole series of designs and engineering and UL testing and fire rating and all that stuff.
And a sale.
And exactly, and a sale.
And they love it. They love it.
Exactly.
People have said to me, "Well, how do you get contractors to come in and spend all this time with you?" I said, "That's what they want to. That's how they sell their work."
Yeah.
Number one, and number two, they're so delighted that someone actually is taking their knowledge and respecting them, because the process doesn't respect them at all.
Yeah.
From day one, it says the people working this job are a bunch of idiots, and we're
even
running
the language. We talk about buying trades. They're being, like they're a light fixture.
Yep, that's true. That's true. Tom, where did you always want to be an architect growing up around it?
Well, no, I didn't. And I had, every time I'd pick up a Lego, my father would thwack me on the back of the head, but I'm a stubborn bastard.
Hand him a scalpel.
And I didn't. I actually started going into, I thought it was going to be pre-med. I started in science, and then it just, then I took a college science class, and I was like, oh, that's the end of that. And I ended up getting into set design, where I really ended up very much enjoying set design was so great because it was set design and set construction. So you'd draw something, conceive of something, and then you'd build it. You'd put it up in a weekend, it would run for a weekend, and you'd strip it down to a black box and you'd start over.
Wow.
So it was like the entire trajectory.
Yep.
in maybe 3 months of design and then a week of construction, and then you see it in a show for 3 days and then come down. And of course, the feedback loop in architecture, I worked on one project for 5 years from start to finish.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
So to have that quick turnaround was so valuable early in my career. The downside of course, is that it's completely impermanent, and it's all a farce, right? I designed a set that looked like Stonehenge, but it was made of stone, and the back of it was all taped together with 2x4s, and so there was no
that's where our
reality
are,
to
right?
it.
And so, but you worked at Herzog and de Meuron, and what other firms, when you got your architecture degree, what firms did you work at?
Well, so I had been working in my father's office through high school, building models, doing things like that.
You also worked for a millwork shop, and you were a carpenter in Japan.
I had been exposed to construction because I enjoyed that. It wasn't really design at that point. And then together, before architecture school, we designed. I did drawings on a house in the Catskills on a piece of property that our family owns. And then I went and physically built it. So that was the first time I got to test this kind of feedback loop in architecture and got pretty excited.
Good for you.
And then I worked for Frank Israel's old firm out in LA.
Oh, I remember Frank. I knew him, yep.
Yep, for about 3 years. And then went to Europe and worked in Switzerland. And then ultimately they moved me to Minneapolis for that project. Okay.
And so, and then Peter, where is the family from? Where did you all live when Tom was growing up? And are there other kids as well?
We live in New York.
Okay.
And we had a piece of property in the Catskills that we've had for 50 years before anybody knew where the Catskills were. It's gotten so hot. It's amazing.
Yeah. It's like Rhinebeck. We're doing a project in Rhinebeck. Everybody wants to be there.
Yeah, well, we're right across the river from Rhinebeck. Same thing.
Yep.
And I have two sons, and my other one is Mr. Hollywood.
The successful one.
he went to Hollywood and Thomas became an architect. And Thomas at one point said, Will, how is it that you make more, 10 times as much money as I do? And I said, well, that's really not true, because very soon he's going to be making 20 times as much money as me, which has turned out to be the case.
But it's funny because what he does is actually, there must have been something in the water, because he's a filmmaker. He writes and directs
That's great.
Movies, but it's essentially design build, right? It's very similar. He writes a script, which would be our concept design.
Sure.
And then directing it is kind of
all the
trades, and putting it all together is the site and the costume, and then the lights and the editing, and then all the way through to the end product. So there's got to be something. There's something fundamental that happened when we were little that affected us as different as our.
And we have a real scholar mother, who's the famous scholar, who just retired, actually.
Nice. Congratulations.
The age of 80.
Wow.
At the age of 80, yeah.
So are you both enjoying practicing together? And it seems like you're having a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think that's the
it's fantastic.
That's great.
If you like what you do every day, you can do anything, right? And because there's a lot of stuff in our profession, as you know, that is not the most fun. But if you're fundamentally excited by what you're doing, it's all worth it. And I think and
he doesn't have any trouble finding someone to cut the bullshit.
We both are.
That's for sure. So Peter,
and he's got some good stories.
And kind of wrapping up, Peter, what do you want your legacy to be?
Well, what I'm trying to do is to get architects to have a better life, and to have more power, and to do what they ought to do. If I can make some impact on the profession, I'd say that it doesn't quite equal making a great building, but I'd say it's something that I hold important, because it's so fucked up. It's just hard to believe.
You didn't realize you needed a censor for this, did you?
That's all good. I love it.
That's right. I'm sorry. Cut that out.
It's not
all good. No way. And then
I could go for days talking about how incredibly stupid it is.
Yeah, I love it.
Everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. It's no secret.
Yeah, listen, I've had even clients directly say, "Man, you guys are in a tough business. I don't know how you do it." And I'm thinking, "Wow, you're the client, for God's sake."
Yeah.
And so I guess, Tom, last thing, is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to?
No, I mean, I would say that we also are really committed, I think, because I've seen some of the things that you've written about and talked about, but we're committed to trying to change the profession, to increase its standing, and increase, make it a better profession, and improve our built environment, right? That's fundamentally what we do. So, at least for this aspect of it, if people are interested in design build, it's not as impossible as it all sounds. It's not so hard to start, and it just takes kind of the will to try at a small scale. And so it's like we can, as a profession, we can do this if we all do something to change it, and not just allow the current trajectory and trend to go undisrupted. Right. So it's like a bit of a call to arms.
Yeah, if you want to know how to do it, and that's the question that hasn't been asked, just do it, but start small.
Yeah,
and do it, and you'll find that if it's offered as an option to your clients, they'll grab it up, they'll gobble it up. The last thing they want to do is be a judge between a crazy architect with funny glasses and a guy with a tool belt.
I love it. Well, I'm inspired. Listen, I'm gonna give it a shot, because this is right up my alley. And the more I do things in terms of building them myself, I always think, man, this really is not that hard. Why are we waiting around here to get things done ourselves? So I want to thank you both so much for taking the time for a great and fun conversation. As I said, I'm inspired to give it a shot, and I hope others are. Is there any?
Come by if you come to New York and you want to come by the office, we'd be glad to.
I definitely would like to meet in person for sure. So I'm in New York all the time. Our office is, in fact, in New York. We're off 528th Avenue. So we'll talk offline and we'll get together for sure. I'd love to meet you both in person.
Yeah,
cool.
And this was fun. So thank you for.
Thank you. Is there anything in particular you want to plug? Your website, social media if you have it.
The website is a great intro into it, and there's a lot of information on our website because it's hard to cover in a short session about how it works, but it's not. This is not a secret. We spend a lot of time. I just late last week I gave a talk to a bunch of young architects who are interested in design build. We very much want to increase this aspect. This is an alternate delivery method to make the profession and the built environment better.
Great.
If you go to the website, there's the lower line of projects is a series of videos, mostly about design build and about just very simple concepts that, when extended, are really powerful.
Perfect. Well, we'll put links to it and everything in the show. So thank you both again. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to meeting in person.
Sounds good.
All right.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.